Thanks for tuning in with us today. I'm Bernd Körber, head of Mini. On behalf of our team, our companies URBAN-X and the entire BMW Group, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second day of the URBAN-X Summit. Mini is a brand that was born out of a crisis. As the world went through the Suez oil crisis in the late 1950s, the classic Mini was the outcome of a simple but clever solution: to restructure, redesign and re-engineer the car using creative use of space and resource efficiency. Following the same spirit and the belief that cities are at the heart of innovation, we created URBAN-X to support startups working to make city life brighter. With our partner URBAN-X, the leading early-stage investor in urban tech startups, our goal is to run the best accelerator program for startups tackling some of our city's most pressing challenges. Since 2016, we have worked with 65 visionary startups building solutions to make city life brighter, including many of the leading startups across mobility, energy, and the built environment. With cities at the forefront of the climate challenge, decarbonizing buildings has become a leading local priority and one of the most promising paths to a low-carbon future. Thank you for your interest, support, and commitment to brighter city life. I'm pleased to hand it off to Stonely Baptiste, founder of the URBAN-X, who will introduce today's speakers.
Thanks, Bernd. Hi, everyone. I want to start by just highlighting the fact that our portfolio and alumni have gone on to raise over hundreds of millions of dollars in follow-on funding and creating billions of dollars in enterprise value. But much more importantly, they continue to move the needle on upgrading and reimagining cities for climate change. One of the most significant areas we've worked to reimagine and upgrade cities for climate change is the built environment. From how we build buildings for more resilience to how we operate them for more efficiency and emissions reduction, decarbonizing buildings has become a leading local policy and one of the most promising paths to a low-carbon future. A number of previous cohort companies tackling this have gone to massive scale of impact and value creation, including, for example, Sapient Industries, a cohort 4 company that continues to help buildings take control of their energy consumption at the plug load scale. Today, I'd like you to meet 2 new URBAN-X companies tackling this very issue. Please join me in welcoming Builders Patch and Urbio for a discussion on how new AI and data-driven solutions can create a greener, more affordable built environment. I'd also like to introduce you to today's moderator, Jeff St. John, Editor-in-Chief at Canary Media. Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, Stonely. I appreciate the introduction. My name is Jeff St. John. I'm Editor-in-Chief at Canary Media. And I'm here with 4 esteemed panelists, including 3 URBAN-X companies. First, we have Kanan Ajmera, who is CEO and co-founder of Builders Patch. Second, we have Sébastien Cajot, who is CEO and co-founder of Urbio. Third is Jim Baldwin, who is CEO and co-founder of Domatic. And last but not least, Sadie McEwen, Executive Vice President and Head of Construction Lending and Initiatives at the Community Preservation Corporation, a customer, if you will, for the 3 startups we're about to meet. We're going to be talking for about 45 minutes amongst ourselves, but we'll also be opening up audience Q&A at the end of this presentation, so please stay tuned for that. And the topic of discussion today is data-driven innovation that can enable greener and more efficient housing and energy infrastructure. That applies to the technologies within or surrounding buildings. It also applies to the financing of housing that can be made affordable for all. And there's certainly a pressing need for this kind of innovation. Buildings are responsible for roughly 40% of US carbon emissions, and residential buildings are a significant portion of that footprint. There's a huge need to make multifamily housing more energy efficient, to electrify heating and appliances, and otherwise reduce the carbon footprint of the buildings we live in. But there's also a huge need to expand access to affordable housing, to make housing more affordable at large, and to ensure that housing is healthy and supportive of the families that live there. And when it comes to innovation, while new buildings offer a clean slate for new technologies and methods and new financing models, most of our existing buildings are still going to be here 50 years from now. So we need effective solutions for the built environment we have, and technology, infrastructure, and public-private financing structures that address those more complicated challenges. So let me ask the four of you all, how does your company or organization relate to these challenges? And what are you all working on to help solve them? Kanan, would you mind if I began with you?
Hi, I'm Kanan, the founder and CEO of Builders Patch. And I will start by telling Builders Patch is a platform that works for multifamily housing developers and lending institutions. And that could be anybody from the government to subsidiaries or banks and community banks like CPC, for instance. They work on the platform on the very on the closing process of construction loans. We bring together all the data and the files, and our promise is that we drive down the as well as the time to close any multifamily deal. And as a result, we can build more housing quicker and faster.
Excellent. Thank you, Kanan. And Sébastien, could you tell us more about Urbio's artificial intelligence and how it helps organize and optimize the kind of investments we're making in the built environment?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jeff. So, hi, everyone. I'm Sébastien. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Urbio. We're based here in Switzerland. And what we're doing is we're basically developing a software that helps or that accelerates the transition of utilities to clean energy. So in a nutshell, Urbio is basically combining the expertise and the intuition of engineers and combining this with the power of computers and AI to automate the design of clean technologies. And as a result of this technology, utilities can make not only better and more sustainable investments, but they can really do so while significantly reducing the time they need. And so, as you outlined, Jeff, existing buildings are really playing a major role now in climate change. And we really believe that now is the right time to be talking about digitalizing the utility sector. They have basically less than 3 decades in front of them to completely reshape their infrastructure. They have to move away from traditional models based on fossil fuels and start embracing these new decentralized systems where technologies are today or will be more and more distributed in space. Everything is becoming interconnected. There's volumes of data to process. So really a lot of work, and Urbio and digital solutions are really helping them in this ecosystem move with more confidence. And a few words also about Urbio. So we're actually 3 co-founders. Niels is bringing the deep tech skills and expertise. Nicolas has years of industry experience as he worked with utilities in the past. And as for me, my background is in environmental engineering. I work for entities like EDF and local government, and I have a PhD in energy planning. And at Urbio, really, our goal is to improve how users can better navigate this new complexity with innovative software. So I'll be happy to elaborate a bit on these points in the discussion.
Wonderful. Look forward to it. Jim, I think Domatic is an interesting kind of corollary to the kind of work that we've heard in that you all are working on the wiring and electrification innovation within buildings themselves. Could you tell us a little bit more about what Domatic does?
Yeah, I'd love to. So at Domatic, we don't think affordable housing has to be at odds with the idea of better housing. It should not mean by default substandard housing. So we're focused very much on reducing the cost of construction of the electrical part of a building, which allows us to not only make it cheaper to build a building, but also makes it more energy efficient and yields a better building that has healthy environment aspects, including better lighting, better comfort control, and better ventilation. Those are all things that should be achievable in an affordable housing environment. And we do that by disrupting the way AC wiring works today. So we're replacing the legacy high voltage AC with a new approach that is safer, simpler, and much more standard, allows a whole new ecosystem of devices and applications to grow that can power the smarter, more efficient buildings of the future.
Interesting. And certainly so many more loads in the house are DC powered nowadays. That makes sense. And Sadie, as a community preservation corporation, I'm curious to know how you look at the ability to leverage the kind of innovations that technology providers like the like these, and how you look at the opportunity to put these kind of technologies to use to fulfill your mission.
Sure. So I work for the Community Preservation Corporation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit mortgage finance company. We were originally created to address disinvestment in neighborhoods in New York City in particular that were severely blighted. And by we're a risk-sharing venture for private capital. They bring their capital through CPC. And then we make investments where other lenders haven't really started to invest yet. So if you think about New York City in the 1970s, that makes a lot of sense because there were a lot of neighborhoods where lenders didn't want to go. CPC was one of the first ones in to provide an investment platform for other lenders and other equity providers to come in and make investments in real estate. We focus primarily on affordable housing, but we are a multifamily and mixed-use lender in cities and communities across New York State primarily, but in the tri-state region. We also have a mortgage bank, so we're a national footprint. With respect to decarbonizing the built environment, we also see this as a place where not many conventional mortgage lenders have gone yet in any significant way. And so we are trying to bridge some of the gaps to bring money that would otherwise already be in multifamily real estate and have it incorporate the components of decarbonizing a building. And we try to bridge the knowledge gap between building owners who own and operate buildings that are now being regulated by state and soon to be federal legislation, which is going to require them to decarbonize, and then the lenders that finance those buildings. So we're highlighting the risks of not decarbonizing relative to the laws that people are regulated by. And then we are bringing to the lenders some tools to help them understand how to integrate decarbonization and energy efficiency into their underwriting so that you don't have to reach for a separate source to do this. It gets integrated into the capital that's already available to multifamily buildings. Because if you can change the way the capital behaves, then you can change very broadly the way multifamily gets developed. And that goes for new construction, which is frankly much easier to decarbonize, as well as the existing buildings. And that's the bigger challenge. And that's where data in particular plays a huge role in helping people understand the benefits, not just in decarbonization, but the economic benefits of driving greater efficiency and bringing down the cost of, not the cost, but the usage of energy at a property so that we can maintain affordability. Because in addition to a climate crisis in the United States and probably elsewhere in the world, we also have an affordable housing crisis. So we need to deal with both.
Absolutely. And that brings up an interesting, I think, tension and that may exist between the idea of efficiency and the idea of affordability. I know that we all agree that lower energy bills make for more affordable housing, but I would also imagine that some of the technology and some of the financing and policy tools for driving efficiency and electrification and kind of early adopter style housing or in new built environments are not the same tools as those we need to affect the same changes in affordable housing and in legacy environments. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Sadie, about where you are experiencing those tensions arising and how you see them being addressed and solved for in the context of the work that you do.
It's a great question. And there are a lot of challenges. So primarily what we see is that on the financing side, where all the money is that drives investment and change in physical buildings, there's a lack of awareness and a lack of understanding of creating a decarbonized built environment and greater efficiency in operations. And then on the energy side, we're seeing all this innovation and all of these finance companies that are focused on the technologies. And so you have a very technical group of operators focusing on the systems in a building rather than focusing on the entire building. And the way to get the mortgage market to move is to bring them the data to show that buildings operate better, that they are healthier, and that they are just better buildings that would be compliant and low risk from a compliance perspective once you decarbonize them and drive down those costs and that usage.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of data, I guess, is the challenge.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of data, Kanan, I believe that this is kind of Builders Patch's sweet spot, and I think you've described how this data is critical and hard to get. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about how Builders Patch works with the financing parties and all the other parties that Sadie mentioned in standardizing this and making that data available.
Yes, one of the main things, and Sadie on it, one of the gaps right now is that finance, first of all, what we help in is just digitizing and bringing data for underwriting to close a loan quickly. So if I were to take Sadie's example, Sadie's group would use our platform to bring in all the data from different affordable housing developers, as well as multifamily, market rate housing. And we would build this repository of multifamily housing data, which is construction, the cost of construction, the cost of financing, the cost to operate. So currently, for instance, most lenders are not able to use their own past data to make data-driven decisions, right? To underwrite their next deals. And that's where we come in. We are helping not just in the early process digitize for bringing in the developers, bringing in the data, making it absolutely accessible to someone like Sadie, where they don't spend any time to bring in all this information and an investment-ready memo. So that sort of saves. But ultimately, because we would have data coming in from different types of lenders and developers, we would become the database of all multifamily housing, which we believe will impact how quickly housing can get built, how we can drive down costs, because right now it's a black box. You don't really have clarity on what is the cost of housing from lender to lender, from region to region, especially in affordable housing, which is driven, government, has government, public, private money in it. So our repository, by helping them in a very sort of difficult task of closing each deal and making that very smooth, but in the long run, helping lenders and developers make data-driven decisions.
It seems like a really invaluable resource for sure. It occurs to me that this process is taking place on one side of the meter, so to speak, and that there's probably a lot of the work that is going on that is of interest to the utilities that are, of course, responsible for providing the optimal mix of energy to supply these new housing developments in these renovated buildings out there. Sébastien, I don't know if you can help us explain how you at Urbio optimize for the utility side of this whole equation when it comes to individual buildings or down to the neighborhoods, or out to the neighborhoods for that matter.
Yeah, it's correct. I mean, utilities have a huge role to play in this field, and it's interesting actually because the question is interesting and relevant, right? Is there a tension between efficiency and affordability? But at the same time, there's kind of a paradox also when you think about the price of renewable electricity that has really plummeted in the last decade. So when you think about it, wind and solar have become cheaper than fossil fuels. And it kind of raises the question then still, why are we not seeing solar panels, for example, on every rooftop? And I think the answer to this question helps us also understand how to better move forward. And there's a recent study actually that asked different building owners what are the main barriers, or basically why don't you have solar panels on your roof? And the answer here was quite counterintuitive in the sense that the first answer was not at all about finance or investment. Actually, the first reason they stated was the lack of information. So not being well informed, not knowing whether solar is something relevant for them, what they would gain, what they might have to pay, and they didn't even know who to speak to. So this is really where utilities are coming into the picture and have an important role to play to inform clients, building owners on the solutions in front of them. And Urbio here is really helping them kind of dig through this massive workload. When you think about the millions of buildings that they have to tackle, Urbio is automatically generating solutions for them in order for utilities to approach clients with a highly customized proposition. And kind of in parallel to this, the second reason these building owners stated was still about finance and capital. And I think here in Europe, we're starting to see also very interesting models. We call them energy contracting. I think in the US, it's more about energy as a service or energy performance contracts. And utilities are really now championing these kind of business models thanks to progress in technology. So with this, it's kind of relieving these financial barriers in the sense that utilities are taking on the investment costs, approaching clients, building owners, and saying, let's invest in the asset, let's install it and operate it, and at the same time, we sell energy to you at a lower price. So it's really a win-win situation, both for utilities and building owners, who basically just have to commit to a long-term contract and let the space to the utility for deploying these assets. So basically, this business model is really exploding, if I may say so. And there's really millions of buildings in front of us to be addressed in this way. And as technologies are getting better, there's just really this massive amount of repetitive and iterative workload that utilities will have to dig through in the decades to come. So generative design here is really helping them absorb this workload that's to come and provide the best offers for the different building owners in the territory.
Yeah, it does seem that there's an important time is money consideration to be made here. We really do need to get the iterative process moving faster and faster. I don't know, Jim, if you have any thoughts about how what might be viewed as a relatively significant disruptive change to the built environment in the form of a new wiring architecture kind of fits in to this picture, and how you go about talking to folks about how what you do impacts the cost of construction, the cost of renovation, and how what you do is kind of backloading the benefits of a DC-based architecture to the expansion and proliferation of many more DC kind of configured energy resources out there.
Yeah, I think a lot of innovations in the construction industry are hinged upon the concept of a payback period. Like how many months, 18 to 24 months, is it going to take before the savings from the implementing this capability pays for the upfront costs? And one of the things that we really, like to think about with Domatic is we're actually making that zero, because the system we're creating is cheaper to install and faster to install than a traditional legacy wiring architecture. The payback period is you're done. You've already saved money. So the capability we can install in the building is already, the builders are already motivated. We don't have to think of convincing the builder to do this so that the owners and occupants of the building can get the benefits of it. The builders are very happy just saving the time and money up front. And then we address energy efficiency and operational efficiencies with the owners of the building, and then we address the overall quality of the environment for the occupants.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I should probably ask you all, you mentioned the importance of the role of the finance sector, and the importance of the role of the utility sector, the importance of the role of new energy as a services offerings and the like. I don't know if you all have any points of view on what the role of the government is right now and should be in terms of providing the sustainable, affordable, and energy efficient housing. I know the Biden-Harris administration has a host of policies aimed at creating new federal programs, and I know that there are probably a lot of differences between the U.S. and Europe as well on this front. But what do y'all think? What is the proper role for the government? Where could the government really step in and make a big difference here? Please feel free to jump in. Yes, Sadie.
So I would say, particularly here in the United States, where we have a huge infrastructure bill coming out, we think of things in the world of affordable housing in terms of government priority. And for years, governments have priority for making housing affordable, and they've created an entire ecosystem of programs and subsidies to support housing affordability. That's great. We don't have enough of it, but we have a lot of it. Now government has decided that it's a priority to combat the climate crisis and decarbonize the built environment, which is great. In the event that the government is going to make that a priority, it cannot be an unfunded mandate, and it cannot come without the infrastructure required to support it. Because until we get to where Jim is going, and it's actually less expensive to do these things, owners and operators of multifamily housing in particular are going to say, it's too expensive, I can't do it. And they're going to try to avoid it. And so government, it's incumbent on government, while the costs are high, to pay for the innovation, to drive new development, new technologies, particularly as it relates to data and creating efficiencies, to bring the utilities along, which they have not come along in a meaningful way in the United States, but that's where all the data lies and that's where the energy flows through. So it's important for them to coordinate that. And then, provide the tools and the resources in the form of programs and incentives and subsidies, so that owners can provide both affordable housing as well as energy efficient and decarbonized housing. Because otherwise the two do this, and they need to do this. And if government is going to make both a priority, government needs to, particularly here with our infrastructure bill, have that infrastructure bill really have concentric circles around where the two come together.
Yeah. Kanan, I believe you had a thought on that as well.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that and say that, apart everything that Sadie's saying is absolutely true. But the other thing that I think is important to consider is, for any significant progress, the government has to literally come on board with technologies like us, or the understanding of bringing government up to par. So just to speak of this infrastructure bill that is talking about $360 billion coming into affordable housing finance, right? You want to deploy these funds to build more housing and build more sustainable housing. You want to build more affordable housing quickly. The pipe work is the same. It's the same agencies, it's the same banks, it's the same sources. So unless that becomes, enormously efficient, we're not going to be able to have the speed that we're looking for. And I think that's where someone like Builders Patch comes in, and we're working with New York City Housing Development Corporation, where they're going to use our platform to be talking to every developer who comes in for a loan. And I think those are the kind of innovations that bringing in awareness to the government sources and bringing in these sort of technologies at the government level, as well as with smaller community, nonprofit banks, nonprofit developers, is how we will ultimately create more affordable housing quickly and efficiently and cheaply, I would say, cheaper than where we are right now.
Right. It's interesting. And I wonder to what extent DOE's kind of buildings, R&D projects are including software that manages the smoothing out and standardization that you're working on, as well as kind of new energy and material sciences and that kind of thing.
And also,
Sébastien, yes.
I was going to say, it does allow us to even tie between sustainability and affordability, right? Because if we really have to come down to the cost of operating a building, or the cost of energy, or the cost of, so that's where, if you look at Jim wiring the building, and then there is a direct impact where we can show, projects that he's worked on versus others through our operating costs, and you can see the difference. And I think that's where the owner operators will buy in, and the visibility of the data structures will really create that momentum in adopting new technologies and adopting new financing mechanisms, and create that, we already have an ecosystem in affordable housing, as Sadie mentioned, but, just being able to make that work in a way that you're going to have, be able to spend money that is being earmarked for this, go into the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some great examples of government actions recently that are pushing us forward. California's solar mandate, as of January 1st of last year, is pushing solar into the forefront with residential housing. You cannot build residential housing without accommodating solar in California from here on out, and that's going to be true of commercial buildings as of 2030. The push towards electrification to free us of using fossil gas for heating and cooking is a huge step forward, and it's really great to see that. We don't often see government leading the way when it comes to these kind of initiatives, though. It'd be great if they could, see the future and start to push on other aspects, like like looking for ways to add intelligence to buildings, which can lead to more efficient buildings because of the ability to have feedback from sensors that are installed. It's 2021. Sensors are not a complex concept now. The issue is getting them installed. And if the governments can say, look, you buildings need to be smarter. There's a little bit of that going on in commercial with Title 24 in California, but why not have all residential buildings have some standard for this? And the only thing holding it back is, the affordability of that. And that's the thing we're trying to address. We'd like to think that you could have a Title 24 style, completely, a sensor-laden building for less than the cost of what you spent today.
Yeah.
Maybe adding on what you're saying, Jim, and what Kanan and Sadie also have mentioned, I think what will be very key in this whole transition is the availability of data. And we see now so many initiatives and technology that is giving us deep insights into what's going on in the energy system. So IoT, companies like Builder's Patch, who are starting also to collect very important information. And what I find very, very interesting is that governments are now recognizing that data will be an essential asset in helping us move forward in the energy transition. And so we're seeing initiatives in Switzerland, for example. Very recently, the federal government just released a whole bunch of open data that can be used now by SMEs, startups, basically solutions like Urbio, who are kind of giving value to this information, this data that is around, in order to help us make more informed decisions. So I think this is really important, and the government has to take action here to recognize really this importance, and also to work to finding solutions to overcome privacy issues, confidentiality, because really here lies a big key point on how we're going to understand and plan the solutions of tomorrow. And then maybe another point I also wanted to add, where I see governance playing an important role, is in the concept of energy planning. So 15 years ago, the concept of energy planning was basically non-existent. But recently, we're seeing new regulation also in this regard that is either encouraging or forcing local actors to plan their transition to a carbon-free society and infrastructure, to plan this in a very rational way. And I think this is very important, so we know we can already set our goals and start really answering the questions on how we're going to get there. And as energy plans and climate plans start to be conducted, elaborated by these different actors, we see here also utilities becoming more and more engaged in this type of service. As energy plans roll out, we're also starting to understand the fact that we're just beginning this transition, and that there's still a wide amount of technologies that have to be rolled out. If we're talking about district heating here in Switzerland, we know we're going to have to double everything we installed so far in the next 30 years. In other countries, it's really 10x whatever infrastructure is installed. This will have to be now set up until the end of, or by 2050. And we're seeing the same trends with heat pumps and solar panels. We realize that we just basically scratched the surface. We still have 90% of the potential that is untapped in terms of heat pumps and solar panels. So at least now we start to know a little bit where we have to go. And the question is really, how are we going to deploy in a very efficient way these technologies in the right places?
Yeah, I would agree completely. And I'm fascinated by the idea of AI in this space of particularly converting the built environment. Having that information is really so critical, and that information, the data, doesn't exist. I mean, I think about, with the built environment is a very complicated issue. When I think about the transition of cars, say, to EVs, to electric vehicles, that's a much simpler thing. It's one, you drive a car, it's gas, and the next car you drive, it's electric. And what is interesting to me is that car companies have started to try to think about themselves as data companies that happen to make cars. And I think it's going to be very hard to get real estate owners and operators to think about themselves as data companies that happen to own and operate real estate. And the only way to do that is to give them information that's meaningful, that will meaningfully impact the way they own and operate their buildings. And we have seen it from very simple things like energy management systems on boilers. We have now owners that will pop open their laptops on vacation to see which apartments are using the most heat so that they can call the super of the building and tell them to go up and have Mrs. Smith shut her window or whatever it is, because they're so focused on what the data is telling them and how the data is driving their decisions and how they operate their buildings. And I really agree completely with Sébastien that that needs to lead. And that is a tool that the government can foster, can promote, can invest in, so that the data then allows all of us that own, operate, finance, and supply buildings with building materials to focus on the things that will make us have the smartest choices. Because right now, I just go to Home Depot and I buy what's on the shelf. It's not a smart choice. It's a choice based on price, not a choice based on all of the other factors in operation, in cost long-term, in longevity and sustainability, and all those things that the government has decided is now a high priority. So,
right. So where is the equivalent of the kind of scanner code that you scan on the different appliances on the shelf at Home Depot, and it instantly tells you how much that thing is going to cost you over 10 years and how much money you're going to save? And then adds, if only all this other supporting technology and data infrastructure is there to enable that optimized savings. I don't know if such a thing exists, but
no, we should be able to know in arrears if we're actually fulfilling that promise. It's one thing to do a formula and say we're going to save this much energy, but to be able to show that we actually have done it in the past has never been done before. That's what what's possible now.
I also think that the financing itself. So the idea that there are so many different financing choices in building affordable housing, and the cost of the financing itself is not very, like, you cannot compare the cost from one source to the other, both for the developer as well as Sadie mentioned, that if we put the truth out there, then right there we are sort of building the nature to sort of drive down the cost, right? So if you know what it costs to get financing from X source or Y source, and you know why that is different, ultimately, if government is going to support the building of more affordable housing, we want to use that we want to use that taxpayer money the most efficiently we can. And I think that can be done first by just showing the data transparency, and then building systems to make it more efficient in terms of how quickly can we get a deal financed, how quickly can we get, how efficient is our system of designing, as Sébastien would do, of figuring out what the efficiency and sustainable options would be, or the wiring or hardware would be. So I think that's where the data can first point to what's happening, and then sort of build in additional ways to see how to reduce those costs.
I think it helps to be cognizant of the business models that have to change to make all this possible. The electric vehicle industry, I mean, the biggest change is that the car companies are shifting away from reliance on the maintenance service model to, cars that simply need almost no maintenance. Like, so a dealer can't run a business based on, the money they're going to make off of, servicing your car. So now the business model has to change. And it's a fundamental change to the industry. It's one of the reasons why it's taken so long. In the construction world, we've got also similar siloed business models about how things get built and wired. And, there's just a lot of legacy that it takes a long time to get people to understand how and why things should be different. And that's probably the biggest challenge for us to get to more affordable means of building and construction, to find ways to make sure that everybody in the value chain can get on board with this new way of doing things.
Yeah,
and we see this really. Sorry, go on, Sadie.
No, I was just going to add that, government also needs to play a role of educating people. And so, in New York, they've rolled out a lot of pretty aggressive legislation around decarbonizing the built environment by mid-century. And so it's incumbent then on the government to educate everyone along the way. So they've created innovatively for government, they created a climate action council across every department of government. And each department has to recognize all of the others, and each has to intersect. And so transportation intersects with housing, which intersects with agriculture, which intersects with banking. And so instead of staying in their silo and trying to solve the problems in and of themselves, the government has created an environment where they have to talk to each other about how their problems interact and interface, and then very broadly, because it can't just be about the people in government or about the innovators figuring this out. Everybody has to get on board, and everybody has to be involved. Everybody that turns on a light when they wake up in the morning is responsible for trying to drive this change. And so it's really then incumbent on the government using data, using really good stories about success to convince people of why we need to do this and then how we need to do this, and then keep the cost down at the same time. So it's a huge lift, but we can get there.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I wanted just to follow up also. Yeah, briefly, but just following up on what Jim was mentioning about this kind of switch of business models, and utilities are really also in the middle of this, kind of switching from models where they were for decades selling just the commodity of electricity and heat, and now really switching to these as a service models, which which raises a lot of questions about how you price these kind of new services, but it is also opening up a lot of new opportunities for efficiency. So when you think about also smart meters, smart buildings, smart cities, it's enabling us to be much more efficient in the infrastructure we're building. Today we're basically oversizing infrastructure by not considering this smart management of when people switch on their light or turn on the washing machine. If you can optimize this in a very smart way, you're basically over time reducing the number of power plants you have to build, and making really the whole system much more efficient. So again, to the importance of data that we need to start to process.
Yeah. Well, we do have an audience question actually on that topic, which is something that I can kind of vibe with, having been one of those guys who got a Alexa from his dad and still hasn't plugged it in because I don't want a machine listening to what I say, which is, how do we inspire more trust in citizens for digitizing the built environment? What guardrails are necessary on technology companies that are pushing the envelope? And this may well also apply particularly to folks who are living in affordable subsidized housing, who do feel like that control over their environment is an important part of, feeling good about where they live. I don't know if that's a major issue or how you guys address that concern and that need for folks who live in modernizing buildings to feel in control.
So we think about this all the time. This is a big issue for us, and the truth is, it's not germane to the building industry. Every industry, that as we digitize and we get smarter and have more data, we've got this concern. And I've built lots of security systems before protecting, premium content for delivery to set-top boxes. I understand how important it is for people to have secure systems, and I know for a fact security there's no magic bullet to it. You don't simply sprinkle some security dust on a system and suddenly you're protected. You've got to be secure by design. You've got to have a constant process of evaluating the security of a system through penetration testing and open analysis. And one of my lawyer friends once said, sunshine is the best disinfectant. Having the systems that are designed to secure data lay bare so that they can be analyzed by the security industry and people can poke at it is the best way to make sure we close holes. But you can't ship a product without knowing how you're going to update the firmware of it so that you can improve the security over time. You have to plan for that. If you don't expect that, you're gonna run into problems.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I would say that to create an environment where owners of property are welcoming technologies like gyms, There's other data out there that we need to focus on, particularly in low and moderate income neighborhoods, particularly with public housing. The health outcomes in those communities are very poor because they are in the worst locations. There's the most amount of, say, blacktop in an urban environment in the poorest neighborhoods, which raises the heat shield. They have higher instances of asthma and everything else. A better building, built sustainably to a standard of construction that drives better air quality, could really impact that data as well. And then you could show people living in low and moderate income communities and the building owners that own those buildings those better outcomes, which could then inform also the desire and the need to build these buildings more efficiently and more sustainably, because there's so many other things, so many other benefits that you get, particularly as it relates to green roofs and more green spaces, planting more trees. I mean, it really becomes a holistic approach to community built around this idea of sustainability, which isn't just about building technology, it's about community and all of the other things that impact residents' lives beyond just the building that they live in. And so I think trying to pull data from all of those places, and a platform like Kanan's can absolutely collect all of that data as well. And so you have one system. And the thing I love about Builder's Patch is that I'm one lender and I look at only my data. I would love to have access to everybody else's data. And it's the same with the utilities. Like, people sharing data. I don't know why it's so scary to share data. I mean, we should be happy to share data. Data can drive us forward, but a lot of people don't see it that way.
Yeah. Well, Kanan, do you mind if I drop in a question for you for the audience that kind of folds into this, which is, how do you measure the impact of your company, and how do you measure values such as health outcomes and increased tenant satisfaction with the buildings that they live in into the financial metrics that you're helping to standardize for all these different lenders and underwriters?
Sure. I will take that question next, but I wanted to sort of, talk about what Jim and Sadie alluded to. One of the things about bringing in data across the board is we have to be able to anonymize. So, for instance, if CPC, we have a lot of different lenders think that they have a certain edge, and that is given with their underwriting sort of numbers, right? But at the end of the day, if the data is anonymized enough, where you have no way to tell, I think, as Sadie said, we could inform a lender like Sadie about what a certain building's outcome would be based on the operating numbers of 40 other buildings that have been built in that immediate environment in the past, without her ever being able to tell who those 40 were, who the lenders were. But she has this sort of average data that would help build that in, right? And then the second aspect of how the first thing that Builder's Patch does is it first digitizes affordable housing finance data. It helps build and underwrite housing faster. So that's our first mission. But like Sadie said, we're such a huge platform. We're able to collect asset management data coming from, it could be data coming from Jim's devices or an IoT device, and immediately tying it to the actual income, the expense for the building is how we would be able to really be able to show the correlation. And so now, if you're going to, like Sadie pointed out, build a building that is more sustainable, more user, focused on the user and focused on health outcomes, we can actually show how it is performing better, just with the financing numbers, as well as with how it is different from the rest, right? So we can compare and contrast with the rest of the database.
I totally agree. I think there's a big component of what we do with the data that matters here. But the big privacy issue with that Apple's highlighted has been around abusing the data to advertise on us. And if we don't want to live in a Blade Runner future where everywhere you go, somebody's sticking a personalized ad in your face, and we need to have policies against that. And so the data itself didn't cause that to happen. What happened was the use of that data. It was abused in a way that attracted people.
Right.
Yeah, but I think in the case of utilities, it's quite it's quite special, and I think it's also a question of good communication that has to happen. So when we talk about smart meters, I'm thinking also like in France, there was some issues. The population was very skeptical about giving away their data because of different concerns about privacy. But I think here again it comes to the point of utilities having to really engage in a much more direct way with their customers to convey very clearly what are the gains for their clients and for society as a whole by sharing this kind of information, this kind of data to help us make the system much more efficient. And so I think, really we have to reestablish this trust between utilities and customers. And if we succeed in this, I think customers, end users will really embrace this. I think at least my generation, millennials, care a lot about the climate. And so if you have the occasion, the opportunity to really measure and monitor your data consumption and know how to take actions to improve your impact, I think really we can move forward in this direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to just add one example.
Okay.
When I was in the Netherlands, I was able to visit with Energy Sprong, which was a group that was creating passive applications for social housing, for their low-income housing. So they were making the buildings passive, which was driving their usage down, switching out their fossil fuel systems with all electric systems that, similar to Jim's, just attach to the outside of the building and make it much simpler. And then they installed smart meters inside the units, and every one of the residents got to watch how much they used. If they saved money, they got a benefit in the form of a check in savings. And if they decided they needed to use more energy for a particular month or whatever, they had to pay for that. They could manage it. They understood it. And the data made sense to them. And then on the back of that, a better, healthier living environment, using less energy, spending less money, saving if I want to, really helps everyone, all people, to engage in the process. And then when you say, we need to share this data, they understand why, because the data means something, but we have to bring it to the everyday user so that they can start to demand it. And that's one of the disconnects as well, is that everybody's afraid of sharing data until they realize the benefit of it and they want to start doing it themselves. So that's something that needs to change.
Very interesting.
The ability to say that it's anonymous, it's secure, and there is benefit in aggregation, there's benefit in analysis that is then visually available to the users, as well as, whether it's a bank or whether it's a customer or whether it's a person living in an apartment. I think all those sort of add up to building that trust, which ultimately will help in sort of bringing more data into one source. And the more we do that, the better we get. Yeah.
This is a lot of audience questions are focused on the data and the trust that must be built, including concept systems like a data trust or other solutions. I think that's what you were describing, as well as involving communities in the work that you're doing, which I think is, Sadie, what you were describing happening in that project in Amsterdam. And certainly, I don't know if, Sébastien, you have a sense of, or all of you, where various kind of quote unquote smart city projects happening around the world might be taking what you consider to be a really kind of holistic and well thought out approach to combining all of these features of a data driven, energy efficient, kind of sustainable community in ways that you think are worth highlighting.
I mean, you could think of this Toyota city, which is really aiming at doing 100% of this IoT and really smartness of the entire neighborhood they're building. And I think this kind of project will really help to demonstrate the potential gains that people have by sharing their data, and will also certainly help find solutions on how to respect privacy and confidentiality. I don't think we have already today all the solutions. I think it's really both a question of communication, but also of technically actually ensuring privacy, as Kanan mentioned, anonymizing this information while still harvesting basically the benefits of it. And I think here there's also a lot of work still to be done in exploring the creative business models that we can deploy with this kind of data. So, for example, reducing your expenses if you shift your demand at a time where less people are using it. Also, speaking of electric vehicles, if you allow your battery to become part of this kind of virtual power plant, you may gain also some benefits. I think we're really just starting to begin to understand how we can leverage these technologies to help build really sustainable energy systems in cities.
Indeed. Such a fascinating challenge. Yeah, we have just a minute left. I'll just put in that 1 minute warning. But please, Kanan.
No, I was just going to say that from the perspective of Builders Patch, we are so focused on just the affordability of building housing, right? And the way I look at it is, just in that segment, there is ways and ways of providing transparency of what the cost of housing is, and ultimately driving down the cost of housing, because the only way we can actually solve for the crisis of not having enough housing that is affordable for all in our major cities is to be able to build more. And I mean, we know how it is recently playing out in the New York region, for example, as to what the cost of housing is. People are sort of struggling to make that happen. And I think there is a lot of, my background is in affordable housing development and then finance. And I think there is a lot of, there's a lot of information there that needs to be unpacked, and for us to really be able to see how to reduce the cost. Sustainability is almost this next horse that we are climbing on. And as Sadie mentioned, how the government's saying, here, I need both. I need affordability and sustainability. And the question is, how are we balancing that, and how are we going forward? Ultimately, it's driving to the same goal, but how do we get there is the need of the hour. I think that we are for now the numbers. Yeah.
Wonderful. And we will have many more hours and weeks and months and years to talk about this. Unfortunately, for this hour, we are out of time. Thank you, all four of you, so much for taking the time. And thank you for our audience for your engagement, your questions. Wish you very much success in everything you're doing. And by the way, for accredited investors in the audience, you can connect with these companies through www.urban-x.com, urban-x.com to be precise. We're going to have day 3 of the summit tomorrow with technologies that empower with tools that needed to tackle climate change, like Singularity, Origin Hydrogen, Climate Tech VC, and hey, my boss, Eric Wessoff from Canary Media. So join us then. And on behalf of Canary Media, URBAN-X, Mini, and Urban Us, thank you for participating. Please share your favorite part of today's session on social media and tag at URBAN-XSL, ACCEL. And you can tag me at Jeff St. John, SAINTJOHN as well. And stay tuned for the launch of URBAN-X Cohort 10 this summer by signing up for the newsletter. Stay safe and have a wonderful evening, y'all.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.